So it's Preptober. How far are we into it?
Hello. What are you?
I know, I just put you on the
How
spot.
are we really into it? Zero action.
Zero action. No, that's not good enough. What do we need to do to get your kick started?
I have characters.
Mhm.
I have one obligatory scene, and I have the payoff.
Okay.
What I don't have is the rest of the plot.
All right. So first of all, let me ask you some questions. How about that? Okay. So
Okay. Yes.
we know you're writing a novel.
It's essentially, I think, an action genre story, an adult fantasy slash science fiction novel. It might end up being a bit science fantasy in some elements.
You are going to need to create a magic system and do world building and that sort of thing. So that's a lot of stuff you can do in Preptober. So add that to your list of things to do. That's fun stuff. And because you're doing an action adventure story, then you need to have like a MacGuffin of some kind, a villain of some kind, so you can have like a baddie that the good guy is trying to either outsmart or overcome. These basic conventions of that kind of storytelling. So you said you have your characters. Who are your characters?
Oh, yes. I think there's a bit of work to be done on the characters, but there's a sense in which it's a family at the heart of the story. So it's a mum and dad, probably 2 kids. It feels like a mystery, but really what it is sort of, like an incoming threat that needs to be handled.
I like that.
And yeah, no, well, I'm working on it. And it starts like the novel starts. So one of the scenes, or in fact, the scene that the novel started with was a little bit of prologue. Like there's a sense in which if I write the novel, it may never really appear on the page, but in many ways it's backstory for the family that's quite important and sets a lot of things in motion. Always the plot centers on information, right? Like if I had to like encapsulate what the whole story is about in a sort of like, what's the word?
Logline?
Yeah. It's knowledge is power.
Ooh.
That's the thing under debate throughout the whole story.
Cool.
The idea that knowledge is power. And so like the whole story is about what you know and what you don't know, and whether you should know what you know, and whether that's putting you in more danger, and whether, like ignorance is bliss, like there's an element of my story that I don't really want to spoil too much, but it sort of has a little bit of the Matrix in it. So
I like that. Cool. Also with that, then you can kind of maybe write down some key information that is withholding. So does that mean you're going to write maybe the audience knows more than the characters, or are the audience going to discover this information with the characters?
This is a big decision I have in front of me. So I have already in my head written out the arc to 3 versions of this story. Okay. Version 1, like the main character thinks they're in on the secret, and they let the audience think they're in on the secret as well, but it turns out that it's more complicated than you could have imagined. Version 2 is the audience is always a step ahead of the character, just because of the way the environment is set up. The audience sees things that the character themselves has no access to, right? So a huge part of my story is to do with memory and how much access you have to your own recollection of where you've been and what you've done. Okay. And sounds so there's a sense in which characters are doing many things, but and this is the sort of science fantasy part of it, but there are protocols in place, a bit of a Chinese wall type system where when they pass from one space to the next, those memories get taken from them to protect and keep others safe. And so the audience travels with them, obviously, right? Like, so they see them in every space, but the characters themselves, when they, depart from one environment into another, forget. And so there's a version of the story where the audience is a step ahead the whole way in many ways because of that system.
Because they have the history, and then the characters don't have that history, so they've forgotten it.
Yeah, that's right.
I like that.
And then
I don't think I've seen anything like that. Like I've seen, the character knows more than the audience. I've seen the audience knows more than the character, and I've seen them discovering it together, but I've never seen that the character knew and then forgot and the audience still knows because the audience that's interesting. I like that.
I have seen something like this, so I would have to cite as a direct inspiration for my story, not in a derivative sense. Like, I don't think I'm going to write a story similar to it, but there's a TV show called Severance, which I would say was probably one of my favorite TV shows in the last 12 months. That the conceit of the show is that when you join a corporate organization, you sign up to have your brain severed into two halves. When you're at home, you remember your private life, but as soon as you enter the doors of that corporation, you forget all of that. You don't know who you are on the outside world. You only know who you are on the inside world. And it's this brilliant TV show, huge recommendation to anyone. It's Apple, so it does require another subscription, but I would say sign up for the free. Of all the things I have watched on Apple, and I've watched a few, I watched the Foundation series, I watched Ted Lasso, this one blew the others out of the water for me. It was just a real personal favorite. So that's a direct inspiration for this. And it has a sort of similar, the mechanic inside it is doing relatively similar things, in the sense that, as you say, the audience is seeing all aspects of the character's life, and the character knows, but then the character doesn't know. But the actual story that I'm telling in the environment in which I'm setting it is radically different. The plot's going to go all sorts of different spaces.
That's amazing.
Oh, well, I'm keen on this one. I'm actually quite excited by it. But and then there's a third version of the story, which is a little bit more omniscient narrator and moves POV a little bit more.
So
which has its benefit.
It does have its benefit,
but I don't want to.
But if you did chose that one and you did move POV, how are you going to differentiate between the characters, so that some people will write one in first person and the rest in third, or another way is just to have a really distinctive voice.
I'd use voice.
You need voice?
Yeah. Or I think the other way you could do it in the novel, I'm just sort of, I'm working through all the options, and one of them's quite structural, right? There is a version of my novel that is, say, 5 parts, and each part is a different narrator.
Okay.
I don't necessarily want to head that direction, though. I think my novel in many ways is it centers in on the relationship, right? It's about the family, ultimately. There is an external threat. They are needing to overcome that. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately about, it's about the family in many ways. And I want to stay tight on that, I think. And I think I actually just want to tell it from the point of view of one of the parents. Either the mum or the dad. I've not decided yet. I think there's some benefits in selecting the woman because I am a woman. It makes it somewhat straightforward in some ways, but equally I think there's a sense in which I'm interested in the father's story as well, because a huge plot point in the story is that the kids are put in jeopardy, and that forces the parents to make decisions. And I think a mother, protecting their child at all costs is a story that's been told many, many times. The father doing the same is less common, I think. And so that does interest me.
I think you can do either. I think this is thinking ahead to December, January, way in the future. But when you do get to that point, it would be beneficial to find a father and have them read the story.
I agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
To make sure that, because it's not your experience. But I feel like that's something you can absolutely tell that way. And well, actually, that I'm not a huge fan of romances. But one of my favorite books is High Fidelity, which is basically a romance, but it's written from a male perspective. Now, Nick Hornby is a man, so it's probably a little bit closer to his own experience. Like, then they did the new version, the new Hulu TV version. It didn't do very well. And I felt like the reason was because what they had done was they had taken something that its uniqueness was that it was a story we have seen many times from a female perspective, but from the man's perspective. And then they gender flipped it to a woman. And then it's like, I've seen this, like it took all the uniqueness out of it.
Well, and there's a sense in which, so, I mean, this is spoilers, but you know what, this could change anyway. So I'm just going to tell you that there is a scene. It's a known thing that she doesn't remember what her life is on the other side of that barrier. She knows she has a life. She just doesn't know what goes on inside it, right? And someone comes to her and says, we have your children. You're going to do this thing for us because we have your children. But she goes, well, they're not my kids. They're just two kids. I've never met these kids before. They're not mine, right? And so she weighs this imbalance, and then she says, okay, I am going to do the thing that we are all told to do, and I'm going to report this. And in reporting it, she puts her kids in danger. But they don't feel like her kids at that point, right? And I sort of, it's a thing that I really want to have in the book, but I don't want to have it from her perspective. I want it from someone else's perspective. Because from her perspective, it looks like the logical choice. It's only when you look at it from the outside view that it looks like a betrayal.
The audience brings with them all of the relationships. All of us have parents, whether or not we have children ourselves, we all have parents, and we all know what a parent is supposed to do in protecting their children. And if you had it from her perspective, the audience reaction, no matter how logical in the world you've created it would be, the audience would go, no, you can't do that.
And I think the thing that interests me about that moment isn't her choice. Her choice actually, I think, makes good sense. It's emotional and it's impactful, but it makes good sense, right? I think what interests me is the reaction that the father has, because he's in the same situation and he makes the other choice. And I think that's where it, like, that is at the heart of the story, right? Like, so there's a bit of a that's not the whole plot. That sort of is almost. Yeah.
Well, it might be the inciting incident of the whole story.
I think maybe not maybe it is the inciting incident of the whole story. The whole story centers around this idea of knowledge is power, right? Like, if you'd never known that those kids were yours, would you have cared about their fate?
I think you have a lot more than you think you've got.
What I don't have is the enemy.
The big bad. Well, who has the kids and makes the threat? Because if that's your inciting incident, then that's your villain, isn't it? That's the way inciting incidents work. The bad guy has to bring the danger.
It's what they want that I think is a little bit in question. I think it is. I think there's a few things. So it could be that they want to tear down the system.
Okay.
Or it could be that they want to manipulate people on the inside to get a result, right? Like, the people whose kids they're taking and who are saying, you might not know these kids are yours, but we got them and we're going to, hurt them if you don't do what we're saying. Like, these people are able to make decisions that affect others. And so I wonder if there's a little bit of a blackmail going on.
So it brings me to mind, I'm going to see if there's something here that'll help. I'm pulling up the villain, the antagonist interview that's in my Patreon account. I don't know if you had a look at this yet. I know you're a patron. I think it went up last week. So this is designed for you to interview your villain. So,
all right.
So the questions are worded as if you, the author, are talking to your antagonist or your villain. So when I ask you, what are your core beliefs? What I'm actually asking is, what are your antagonist's core beliefs?
That is a great question. Antagonist's core beliefs would be that the truth sets you free.
Which is actually, I love a villain that has a classic sort of like a good advice as their, because then it's more relatable, I feel. Like, cool, tell us more about that, if you've got more about that.
as in they would say that you are ultimately the sum of your memories. Authenticity and wholeness of self is to be prized.
Sounds like me.
And that,
in your story.
and the price that you pay, live with the pain of knowing, is better than to live in ignorance, even if ignorance feels much better. So another question you can ask your antagonist is, what key moment in your past shaped your character? So basically asking about the backstory. I think my antagonist is not a single person. I think my antagonist is a group.
It's a group of people. So it would probably be like, when did this group form? How did this group form?
Well, so the system that my protagonist is inside is big. So this is the science fantasy element of it, right? Like we're talking a system that is at minimum global, if not solar, right? Like maybe it's, planet Earth plus a few satellite sort of like cities that have this system where, you have your life over there and then you have your life over there, and these two things do not combine with one another, for the very simple reason that, if you are like part of the decision makers, the counselors, the rulers, right? Like the only way you can make wise decisions is to make entirely and really I'm sort of like, here's my world building, right? Like, the only way you can make unbiased decisions is to be totally unbiased and to not know who you are, right? And so if you do not know where you live, who your family is, who your kids are, and where they go to school, you're going to make really great choices about educating all the kids, making sure everyone has good living conditions, and that everything in that world's pretty okay.
That sounds very logical as well. It sounds like you've got very strong arguments on both sides, which I don't see very often. Like oftentimes you can see the bias of the author, and there's like a lesson to be taught, and the people are very wrong on one side or on the other, and I am seeing very good arguments on both sides, which I think is really good.
Well, and I think the system came into place after an intense conflict. Like we're talking like very close to nuclear, right? Like at
maybe
a point
even a revolution.
At the point where everything almost went dystopic, it went dystopic in another way. At that point, this system came in place where they said, okay, if you're going to belong on the council, say it's the solar, the interplanetary council that makes decisions, you're not allowed to know who you are or which planet you're from. because that's going to force you to make good decisions for everyone, no matter who they are or which planet they're from. And someone came up with that solution to a very real problem, which was that everyone was about to bomb everyone else to hell, right? And in that moment, I think that is when this splinter group was formed, because they were not captured in that system. Now, this is science fantasy. And so the system I'm imagining probably has elements of sort of magic to it.
It sounds like you've got a very strong thing. I'm not going to go through this entire questionnaire because we're going to.
I'm enjoying it though. Like, thank you. I'll have to pull it down.
Yeah, pull it out. Yeah, so it should be up in the Patreon. But I'll ask you one more question. So what does this group of villains think of your heroes?
I would say that the system that has been built disenfranchises everyone, and the lack of questioning bothers them. And so they would call the system fragile, because they would say it wouldn't take much to break it. And I think they suspect that if you scratch beneath the surface, then the old tensions still sit there, because instead of fixing what was causing the problems and moving past their differences, they sort of applied this artificial band-aid and just said, okay, no one has any differences anymore. But if you remove the system that is sort of protecting everyone, it's going to be a bit of a dark age before it comes back into, something healthy.
I feel like I feel like there's historical precedent for this. In the 90s, we had the whole PC terminology thing come in, and it got to an extreme. In recent years, back in Canada, they had a sort of a summit.
Referendum?
Summit, like people talking about it. And Stephen Fry went, and he was Stephen Fry is one of the most inclusive people, very liberal, and yet he was against political correctness because he said that exactly what you're saying, that instead of people learning and understanding each other, they're just choosing different language. And while that was maybe helpful, it's a band-aid. It's not actually solving the problem of people just accepting other people's
I would describe it as society on dialysis, right? Like, it's not really living, just surviving.
Yeah.
And it's like, the other thing is, it's killing off what once was there. Like, the culture that once existed in these worlds, right, has died. It's gone. So yeah, the history's gone as well, right?
Yeah. Because it's all segregated. That's fascinating. I think you got a good story there. I'm excited to read it. Very cool.
Might be good.
I know. It's very. I find that planning and preparing can make me feel like everything is very knife's edge. Not necessarily prosaic, but that it could topple either way. It could either be crap or it could be really good.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, like because it all comes down to the actual writing and the execution. No matter how well you plan, it all comes down to the writing. But in regards to winning Nano, sounds like you've got a pretty solid foundation start there. Do you feel a little bit better? Because you said you had nothing, and it sounds like you got heaps.
I think I need to sit down and write a little bit of a synopsis for it, like probably a long synopsis too, right, that works through some of the world building aspects. Because, I think, right now I don't know who the family is. I just know that the parents are in positions of relative power where, the splinter group has realized that if they steal the kids and then send the parents back into that world, they can make a decision that has an impact. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to be done.
No worries.
But keen to do it.
Yeah, well, we'll check in next week and see where we're both up to.
Next time we should talk more about your story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I talk a lot about it, so it's kind of nice and refreshing not to talk about it so much, because all the other videos on this channel are talking about my story, which is a retelling of Cinderella. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. No, that was awesome. Thank you. That was really
Wonderful.
helpful.
Great. Oh, I'm so glad. Cool. And if you're from the future, you can see that live video up there.